All right. Well, welcome everybody back to the Academic Yak podcast where we yak about academia. I am super excited about this episode. It's been a little bit anticipated amongst myself and our group of graduate friends here in Arkansas. So we are really excited to be here today. A couple of reminders, as always, we do record the podcast every single episode and upload that to our YouTube channel. If you haven't checked that out, it is just Academic Yak on YouTube. Feel free to go over to the channel and see the previous episodes. This is our fourth episode in total, our third guest, so we're super excited. Things have been rolling pretty smoothly and excitedly so far. If you're joining us, also please feel free to ask questions at any point. I do have the chat open and I'm ready to address any questions or comments that you may have throughout the duration of this podcast episode. So please ask questions. We love questions. So, without further ado, we have a guest today. Our guest is Toby, and I'm going to let Toby introduce herself to you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Toby, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am a current PhD student at the University of Arkansas. I'm also the co-president of Temple Shalom of Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah, so thank you for being here and spending another day of this lovely weekend with us. Toby and I have had a really awesome weekend. We have been out at Pride Festival in downtown Fayetteville, and what a blast we had this weekend. It's awesome to be able to continue Pride Weekend on the podcast with Toby. It's really an honor to be able to hang out with someone who just continues to promote the community and be an incredible person who just really shows love to everyone in so many different ways. So thank you for being here and letting us continue Pride through podcasting, online, internet radio, if you will. We're really excited about you being here. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, the program that you're in, and kind of walk me through your journey in coming to Arkansas.
Yeah, so I started at Indiana University, where I did my undergrad. I studied neuroscience and Jewish studies. I did honors theses in both, graduated in 3 years, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I started reading public health articles for my neuroscience lab. And the articles that I was most interested in had to do with the advocacy work I was doing, which was in sexual violence. So I found Dr. Jaskowski here at the University of Arkansas, um, and moved here, jumped right into a PhD in community health promotion. That ended up being a master's program. My advisor, PIs, we call them principal investigator, took a job actually at the institution I just graduated from. So there was a moment of transition. And I was really thankful that when I first moved down here, one of the reasons I did is that I got a distinguished doctoral fellowship from the University of Arkansas in conjunction with the Walton Family Foundation. So as a result of that, I had a little bit more financial flexibility when it came to grad school, which is a luxury, no doubt, especially in the grad school world. So moved down here, and then at the end of year one, I had the option of following my advisor or kind of pivoting and staying here, and I built a really strong community. And on a lot of levels, it made more sense for me to stay here, so I did. And
That's kind of unique too. Like a lot of times people will just follow their advisor wherever they go.
Yeah, and part of it was like I'd already changed career paths, or I guess academic paths previously a few times in recent history, I guess in my life history, or trajectory. So it wasn't that unheard of for me to say, okay, cool, we're gonna figure ish out. So I did. So I finished up my master's in community health promotion. I was studying sexual violence and access to reproductive care, specifically abortion. And then here I am now in starting the second year of my PhD in public policy. I'm in the first cohort of the social justice concentration. So now I study policies related to disenfranchisement, marginalized populations, specifically on anti-Semitism in the Bible Belt. So
Yeah.
that being the southern geopolitical region of the United States.
I mean, and what a place to be doing that, right? I mean, you're studying something that has been historically a problem where we live here in Arkansas. We're a little bit lucky to be in a part of the state that tends to be a little bit more understanding and empathetic, but really not as much as it should be. A lot of people claim that there's Arkansas and then there's Northwest Arkansas. And while to a degree that's true, like you still, I mean, you're
Oh yeah.
probably constantly fighting. I know in the duration of time that we have known each other, which has been just a little over 6 months now,
Yeah.
which is crazy. Um, you know, we've had some conversations where mostly just joking, but like we joke through our trauma, it's fine. Where you've talked about some of the things that you've seen just on like bumper stickers and like in passing heard people say in the liberal Arkansas, which is just ridiculous that people really think that this is a liberal place to live. But um, yeah, so I guess you start out in neuroscience and Jewish studies, and you are Jewish, so half of that makes sense to me. The other half, I'm like, okay, so neuroscience, but now you've worked your way into public policy. So, kind of just talk me through how you go from talking about and learning about neuroscience and then work your way into more of the like social justice side of the world, both equally important and really kind of niche for a lot of people. But how do you work your way across that spectrum of academia?
Yeah. So um, the short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is I did it, and I'm super stoked. I've certainly had a winding path, and I think that every opportunity lends itself. And in academia, I think as a lot of us have learned, it really depends on the people that you're with and kind of the environment that you're in. Yes, it's a jump from neuroscience now to public policy, but the things that I've learned along the way and the people that I've interacted with kind of all feed into one another. My interest was always in behavioral neuroscience. So in my undergrad, my honors thesis was on social isolation. And I was really curious, what is the impact on a creature when you keep them socially isolated,
Yeah.
especially for creatures that are meant to interact with people. So I've always been interested in why humans do the things that they do.
Yeah.
And sometimes I agree with those decisions. Like, awesome, you do that cool thing. Why do you keep doing it?
Mm-hmm.
To that other end, I ask, why are there people in Arkansas who are still active members of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan? Why are there people in Arkansas that think it's okay to wear a swastika on a mask?
Yeah.
So I guess the curiosity leads the path more than anything. If there's one continuous thing throughout, it's been a love of learning. Some really, really phenomenal mentors who have seen the big picture before I've seen the big picture. Because I get lost in the weeds. I love a good detail. I love, ooh, great, but like let's plan this. And some advisors decide, okay, well, what do you want to do after school? And I'm like, well, I'm in academia because I don't know what I want to do after school. I am learning and buying time, hopefully along the way. But
Yeah, I think that you hit a couple of things that I think are really important and have been a consistent reminder of being in academia, and that's like a lot of times we are life learners, and we don't really know what we're doing. We just know that we feel it's really important to us, and it's really important to other people, and we want to be a piece of the bigger puzzle, whatever the bigger puzzle ends up being. We have no idea, but we'd like to get there and contribute in some way. Um, I hate hearing constantly from marginalized people how often, the place that I grew up and love can be so hurtful to others, because it changes some of my like collective memory of my like life here in Arkansas. And like I've always known that Arkansas is like this conservative place that has really terrible people in it. But I think because I was lucky enough to be in kind of a little pocket of people that aren't so terrible, although there are still some, and I love you even if you're watching, but maybe get it together. It's like you don't really know until you do. And I think that that's one of the wonderful things about meeting you and the other graduate students that we all collectively call the babes. Another babe has arrived, in case you were wondering.
stretchy babe.
Yeah. But one of the best things about that is that you all continuously challenge me and the others that we find ourselves with um, to really consider the things that we say and that we do and the things that we cherish, and really think about, like, take myself and my entire life's love and understanding of that thing and remove that aspect and just look at it and remind myself, like, okay, but why is this thing the way that it is and why is it here? And so things like, I mean, I've never thought that the Nazi symbol was a good thing, ever. That is not what I'm talking about. I've always known that that was terrible. But, like, Confederate flags as a child, like, that's just what people had in their homes. And, like, that's just something that I saw around. And, like, I always was like, it's kind of fucking weird because I also don't keep, like, an American flag around or anything. Like, I just thought it was weird. But I never really thought about what that could mean for people. And of course, now I'm like, we should probably get over ourselves a little bit.
But
But
you also learned that it was the antebellum era and not the slave era.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
things were, and it's Dixieland and not, and
Yes.
so things were
Yes.
intentionally whitewashed,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term. And so I don't fault anyone. The same way that
Yeah.
where I grew up thinking that straight up, I thought that Arkansas was next to Georgia. I had no idea before I moved down here. Like, the South was all the South to me.
Yeah.
And there's some big misconceptions that folks have about specifically like intellect and
Yeah.
people's attitudes and life values. And like, there are people that I fundamentally just, like you were saying earlier, like people who are nice, people who have, like, there are plenty of nice people who have atrocious views, in my
Absolutely.
opinion. They're still really sweet, and I guarantee they'll still invite me in. Until I find out I'm part of the LGBTQ community and or Jewish and or some other identities that I have.
Yeah.
But like, it doesn't make them any less nice. It's just that their worldview is fundamentally
Fucked
different.
up.
I was gonna say different than mine. I didn't know if we could swear on
Oh
here.
yeah, for
But
sure.
yeah, it's wild that there is someone who, when I first moved here, someone in my graduate program was like, yeah, let's go to Bike Blues and Barbecue. That was my first kind of experience with Arkansas.
Oh, what an awakening.
And then I went to Tawnytown for the Grape Festival. No fucking grapes at Grape Festival. There were just bunnies that were in really precarious situation that I try not to think about for my own soul.
Oh, jeez.
Like, you like throw a thing, you win one. Anyway, but so my experiences of the South were limited. And when I first went to Bikes with Barbecue, they said, "Oh, you'll see some swastikas, but like, don't worry, it'll be fine." And they're like, "Oh," and I noticed a Confederate flag, and I was like, "Oh, am I going to see more of those?" And they're like, "Yeah, but why would that bother you?"
Yeah.
As if, why would a Confederate flag bother me as a Jewish person? Like, they were thinking about me in the context of me as a Jewish person. And I was like, well, in Harrison, Arkansas, they explicitly tell people not to intermarry with Jews. Now, there are already Jews in Harrison, Arkansas, from any of my understanding.
Yeah.
It's genuine, probably not safe, but long-winded way of saying, yes, everyone's worldview is very different, and I feel no safer by a Confederate flag than I do by a Nazi flag. And I think that a fair number of folks in marginalized spaces, specifically like our Jewish community, we don't feel comforted by the Confederate flag. We know what that, like, we know what that symbolizes.
Yeah. Well, and I think that a lot of times people forget that, like, racism isn't just black and white. It's a lot, a lot of things. But to bring it back to what you're studying and thinking about public policy, no, absolutely, like, don't ever apologize for having conversations that are important, because, like, this is also a policy issue, right? We live in a state, in a region of the U.S. and largely the U.S. as well, that inherently has policies that continue to keep people in their marginalized boxes, if you will. And it can then in turn become a health problem, right? So we see, especially now, a really hot topic, and we can choose to or not to talk about this. It's up to you, but abortion and also trans rights with kids, right? These are actual health problems, whether we agree or disagree personally. I think that a lot of people are missing the point of the conversation, and it's not that, like, if I had a child that was trans, would I or wouldn't I, or if I suddenly became pregnant, knowing that that could actually be really harmful for me as a human being, like, whether or not I would or would not have an abortion, like, I don't know if I could. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do that. Like, I think that that would be so incredibly difficult, and I don't know if I personally, as a human being, could do it. But, like, I also don't think that it's up to anyone else to make that decision for me. And I think that that's the part of the conversation that people are missing. And it's a health issue, right? Because a lot of times people who are like me or some of my other family members, if we were to try and have children, like it could actually like maybe kill us or have long-term
Genuinely.
health implications on us, and we're making decisions based on that. And I think that these policies are really harmful for people like me, where it's like, I don't know what I would or wouldn't do. Never been in that position to have to choose. But if I do find myself there, I would like to have that choice.
Yeah.
And so when you are studying public policy, coming from a neuroscience and a public health background, what is it that you are specifically wanting to look at, and how are some of these policies that are developing around us, especially here in the South, how are those looking in your program? Because I'm sure the discourse is interesting.
So there are certainly some positives, and I'll maybe save those for when we're needing a moment after getting into it. But when people say policies are not personal or politics are not personal, I find that oftentimes misguided
Yeah.
because abortion policy may not impact a straight white man, and I know that straight white man, some folks are saying they're persecuted, and I'd argue open up a history textbook and you'd see that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Um, but it's about a fundamental belief that you have the right to determine someone else's life choices.
Yeah.
That someone else does not deserve autonomy. And when you say politics aren't personal, well, we're not regulating testicles. We're not regulating penises.
Yeah.
We're not regulating any of that. Kamala Harris, when Justice Kavanaugh was in the confirmation process, then Senator Kamala Harris brilliantly asked, "How many policies regulate a man's body? How many can you think of?"
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
The answer is zero because
Yeah.
they don't exist.
Yeah.
Truly. And if that's part of the reproductive equation, if we're thinking like super generalized, stereotypical here, man and woman, right? Understanding there's nuances to birth and other things, we're taking out 50% of the equation and instead putting the entire burden on a population that has not had the same autonomy throughout history, that has not had the same rights,
Yeah.
that historically has never had the same access. And so when I look at policy, I think it's absolutely personal. People will say, well, haven't you had an abortion because you talk about abortion? No, I haven't had an abortion. And guess what? Even if I did, so what? It's no one's damn business. 1 in 4 women are going to have at least one abortion in their lifetime in the United States. I'm happy to anyone. I will cite myself. I will send you citations more than you want. I promise that if I'm citing a statistic, it is well researched. The American Psychological let's talk facts for a moment. American Psychological Association helped contradict a myth. Sorry, let me not. A myth. It's a myth. I'm not even gonna call it a fact because it's not. There's been a myth that if you have an abortion, you're more likely to suffer negative mental health consequences. What they find is that when you control for pre-existing mental health concerns, there's they looked at over 100 studies. The American Psychological Association, APA, big reputable organization,
Yeah.
looked at all these studies and they found no independent correlation between negative mental health outcomes and abortion status, whether or not you've had one.
So to break that down just a little bit of jargony. When
sorry.
we're thinking about how research is conducted, when she's saying that they controlled for pre-existing mental health, it means that if you take that part out of the equation and you look at women who did not previously have mental health, I don't like saying issues, but concerns is a good word. Thank you. Then there was no correlation, meaning that there was no relationship between having an abortion and a negative mental health outcome, or a non-significant relationship between the two. It does not mean that no one has ever had them. It just means that women who had pre-existing mental health concerns, who then had an abortion, had a negative reaction related to the previously existing mental health outcomes, whereas women who did not have those, people who were considered healthy, clear, with no previous mental health history, were non-significantly related to having a negative outcome of abortion. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We also know from the research and from the data that Abortion is 11 times safer than pregnancy. So if we're talking about safety here, which
Jesus.
right,
Never heard that.
and that's part of it because but I'm sure you have heard that abortion is unsafe,
Yeah.
that you might never be able to have kids afterwards. You may have heard we've heard things like abortion leads to breast cancer. There's
Yeah.
no correlation. And this impacts someone's, if they're even at a stage in which they can make an informed choice about their healthcare, are they really informed at that point?
Yeah.
Because they're not being fed correct information. And when you ask people a month, a year, even 5 years, I think in one study they did 10 years after an abortion, what the most pervasive feeling is, it's relief.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we know that when we increase access to contraceptives,
Yeah.
when we increase access to sexual health care, which we've talked about, of how it's funny, it's awful that in
Yeah.
states and in areas with the highest teen pregnancy rate, which Arkansas is #1 in the nation in teen pregnancy, and yet sex education not mandated by not mandated by the state. And
Yeah.
then in the places where it does mention sexual health education, it doesn't have to be factually accurate.
Yeah.
You can have someone who has no scientific background, no public health background, no nothing, come in and tell a room full of teenagers or younger that abortions are going to give you breast cancer.
Yeah. And the children have no like concept of anything else. Like they don't have any other understanding. And like for my husband and I both, we went to the two high schools that have the highest rates of teen pregnancy in the state of Arkansas, in the state with the highest rate of teen pregnancy. So I would argue probably in the U.S. In a lot of ways. But we growing up, we've had several conversations throughout our relationship about this experience, and like how normal it was to like see pregnant people at our high school, and like there were daycares for them, and like
Yeah,
it's just like we grew up in a place where we were told that abstinence is the only option in school, mind you, in my public health class, at my public high school, junior high, excuse me. This was a seventh grade conversation. So I'm what, like 13 at the time. And our only conversation from, of course, a sports coach, who,
how Mean Girls esque.
it's very realistic. It's sad. But like it's real. And like this is something that like, all the people I know that have grown up in Arkansas, like we all have similar experiences when it comes to our health education. And like the conversation was, here's a textbook, don't have sex. We didn't talk about condoms. I never even saw a condom for the first time until I was in college, and a guy brought one time, and I was like, okay, I didn't know what that was. We've had some conversations even since we've been in the group of graduate students, the babes, as I so lovingly call us. Um, we've had some conversations where people have said things and I've been like, I didn't know that. I'm turning 25 next month. Okay, I'm fairly young. I have a lot of life to go, but I feel like it's absolutely ridiculous that I was probably 20, 21 before I realized that there are two holes, and one of them I pee out of them and one of them I don't. And I did not know that until after I was done being a teenager.
I bet you didn't learn about masturbation either.
No, I've
Of course not.
never in an educational environment been talked to about what sex actually is. I have seen male genitalia in a textbook, but we didn't go over female genitalia.
Why would you?
We
Joking.
We had, there was the day when they wanted to show the birthing video, and they were like, if you don't want to watch this, or if your parents don't want you to watch this, then you don't have to be here. And so like everyone left because I'm like, I mean, I'm not going to be the only one that stays, right? But like, it was totally optional, and you had to get permission from your parents to even take a sex education course. And they had to see the curriculum before allowing you to take the course. And that's just like what it is here. And like, they still do it this way at my high school. So,
If we bring that into a policy,
yeah.
if we tie that into policy, one of the big policies that we're talking about is when it comes to abortion specifically, is a policy to mandate parental consent for someone needing an abortion.
Yeah.
Now, if you're younger than 18, you don't know that there are two holes in your body. You don't know what your own reproductive anatomy looks like.
Yeah.
You don't know. we don't even know, if, let alone if that experience is consensual or non consensual. Like,
Yeah.
what I'm hearing from you is I didn't have the language to even
Not at all.
name any of this.
No.
And now what many states, including Arkansas right now, what they require is that you have to get your parents' consent before you can get access to an abortion.
Yeah.
And so, let's say your parents didn't teach you about sex, and then your
They
boyfriend
didn't.
says, right,
Love them, but they didn't.
hypothetical scenario, which is not that uncommon.
Yeah.
You're
It's uncomfortable.
right, you're 15, 16, the average age of one's first sexual experience is 17. So let's say 17, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right average. Jack and Jill, let's call them Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill have been dating for a while, and Jill's like, okay, like Jack's pretty cool, and Jack goes, well, I think we should have sex, and Jill has no fucking clue, and is like, okay, cool, like whatever.
Yeah.
Jill gets pregnant because who has any idea what's happening on? Let's be real, a 17-year-old boy, because it's a boy, not a man yet, or according to our legal definition, boy has no idea what he's doing. Pulling out is like not even a thing that he's aware of. And
or
so,
even the fact that people don't know that you can get pregnant even if he pulls out because pre-cum is a thing. Also learned that in my 20s. Continue.
break my heart sometimes.
I don't mean to, but like no
but,
one gave me the language.
Right. And so like it would be very reasonable that by some chance that person gets pregnant. Like Jill gets pregnant. Then what happens? Jill then has to talk to her let's use generalizations here. Jill has to go talk to her parents. Let's just say maybe they're mildly conservative, right?
Yeah.
Where they're living in Arkansas, so
probably. Now, this isn't to say that conservatives are terrible people.
Agreed.
We want to make sure that we're like keeping it clear here. This is just like there is a pattern, and we want to have a conversation about that pattern. Go ahead.
And I think it's important to distinguish the pattern that we see here because it's about less information. Imagine how that conversation changes when someone does not know their own anatomy, does not know what to say, does not know to say to their parents, hey, that was not a consensual experience. I had a non-consensual sexual experience. I need to process through that. I need resource, what have you. Person becomes pregnant. What we end up seeing is that suicide rates for young women are incredibly high, or at least suicide attempts. Yeah. And when they get admitted to a hospital, one of the first things they do with women or with young girls, they take a pregnancy test. And what they find is that there are several studies that have looked at suicide rates, specifically of those who have completed or attempted, and pregnancy rates. And you see a pretty high correlation between the two. And so,
it's so sad.
Right, because if you've never had access to birth control, you know that your parents are super against it. That's not okay. Just get married and have a kid. If that's what you're taught, right? And you have no other information. It's not a bad thing. It's just that you don't have access to that information. And then maybe you go online and you see porn or something like that. Again, we're talking really, really general situations here, but we see it all the time where people do not have information. And then now there's a policy that says your parents have to sign off on it. So for a scared 17-year-old, in Jill's case, it makes sense, unfortunately, that the best option, if she thinks she might be pregnant, might be to end not only the life of that fetus, but her own life as well. Because, oh my goodness, that's the worst thing that could happen. If I had sex without being married, and you're taught from birth, and you're wearing a purity ring, and you got a belly going, like there are issues. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think public shame has a lot to do with this conversation as well, because sometimes even when parents may be willing to like have that conversation with their children, and a lot of times still the information is not shared appropriately, right? Like in the case of my parents are not typically conservative, like I mean a little bit, but like in general, you know, they're much more liberal than a lot of my friends' families have been. But we still didn't have sex conversations. Like I didn't get taught about sex from my school or my parents, either one. And like no shame to them, like it just happened. And so it's like we get to this point and I'm like, if I had been pregnant as a teenager, even though I like know that my parents would have a legitimate conversation with me, I don't know what that would look like. It didn't happen. I can't hypothetically say what that would look like because I didn't really have it. But I don't know that I would have been able to work through even if I could have had that conversation with them, to also work through the conversations with the rest of my community. And I think that that's another big part, is that we're talking about this lack of information, and we're talking about how inherently the problem is that people aren't getting what they need regarding their health, and then they grow up in this environment where they're not having access to proper public health and access to proper health education throughout their childhood, throughout, I mean, again, all through college, I still did not have this conversation. Everything I have learned about the human body and what it's capable of has been through conversations with friends, or seeing a Facebook post and being like, I don't know what that means, and Googling it. Like, my entire health education, for the most part, that's what it has been. And but then there are people who are in my exact same position, who are now senators and people, representatives and mayors and governors, and people who are enacting policy, who also have not had in their entire lives comprehensive health and sex education, who are making decisions on for people, for other human beings, while also still not being informed. And we see this day in and day out when they do press conferences, and some savvy individual who has a wonderful education comes in and says, well, what about this? And they're like, well, blah, blah, blah. And it's some bullshit answer. And you can tell that they just don't know. And it makes it, again, hard for someone like me to see something like that, and why I inherently have not been involved in politics for a really long time. Because sometimes I don't know that they're lying.
Well, and
I don't have the skills I need to make that, understanding for the situation. So people like you come in, and we really need people like you who really know, and can and do the work to like really think about these things critically. Because I don't have the tools.
And one thing that I think is really interesting, while we're still on this topic, is that in cases where they've provided information, so when folks say, well, you can't trust a teenager, well, you're trusting them to raise a child, just
Yeah.
not to abort a fetus, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying you're too young to make that decision. We need to protect you.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when, let's say, you give kids access to condoms? There was a really interesting case study that they did in Oregon, Oregon or Washington. Sorry if you live in those states. They're beautiful. I just can't remember which one this one was specifically from.
But Pacific Northwest,
the land of the mountains and the trees.
Yeah. And the moss.
they looked at they gave high schoolers access to condoms, and they did testing. They did a survey before they implemented a condom program, and after and during. So they have pretty interesting data from this, and from a few different high schools, and they found that those with access to condoms were no more likely to have earlier sexual experiences. They were no more likely to engage in sexual activity than anyone else. All that they were more likely to do was to know how to use a condom correctly, to feel more confident using a condom,
Yeah.
to engage in what we consider healthy sexual behavior.
Yeah.
When we talk about abortion, there are a lot of folks who are like, we get rid of abortion. Well, they also get rid of sex education. They also get rid of access to contraceptives. They kind of gut the whole thing. And what we find, there was a project in Colorado that gave women, low-income women, access to whatever kind of birth control they wanted, to see what are they going to choose. Overwhelmingly, women chose long-acting reversible contraceptives. So those are called LARCs, L-A-R-C, long-acting reversible contraceptives. And that's things like an Nexplanon, like an arm implant, things like an IUD, not an IED, because there was a documented case of a male partner calling law enforcement because he believed that his female partner had a bomb, because she said IED instead of IUD, which is an intrauterine device.
Yeah.
So that's part of like the basic education, right? What an embarrassing moment for that dude calling law enforcement saying my girlfriend's got a bomb, and all she's doing is telling him about her birth control.
Yeah.
So anyway, the Colorado case, to wrap up that one real quick, sorry. When they gave folks access to, they said, pick whichever one you want, we'll cover it. So free access. Women overwhelmingly chose long-acting reversible contraceptives. They chose it over the pill. Folks also had there was a decrease in the number of abortions within that community, especially when we look at.
Magical how that happens.
It is, because when you give people information, and I know I'm harping on this, but it's not that the information doesn't exist. It's not that we don't know if this information. It's not that we don't know what it is. We have really clear examples.
Yeah.
An entire state. We have multiple high schools in a certain area that meet the demographics of a lot of states. And I'm not saying that there's not going to be variation, but we've got really, really crystal clear examples of when we give people information, we give them resources,
Yeah.
it saves money in the long run. I mean,
Yeah.
there are complications associated with pregnancy. Pregnancy is much more expensive than abortion. It truly is.
And not just because it's pregnancy and like capitalism is atrocious and our healthcare system is incredibly fucked up. But also because like you now have a child. So that's at least an 18-year commitment financially.
That's why, and we've seen a rise in folks, specifically women putting, and we hear about women putting babies in dumpsters. If you're telling me that there is not a correlation between limited access to abortion and putting a baby in a dumpster,
Yeah.
we've got to have a real conversation about.
Yeah.
I don't even know what we're having it about, but
Yeah.
something has gone wrong if we're saying that those are not related.
Well, and a lot of times people too will say that, like, oh, well, why would you just abandon a baby? Or, like, why would you put up a baby for adoption? And not even acknowledging the fact that, like, if I was in that situation and I could not have an abortion because I just couldn't do that, I wouldn't be
Right.
strong enough for that, like, I would have no idea where to take a child for adoption. I would have no, right now, I would have no idea where to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's uncommon either.
No.
And I think that the idea that people get in their minds that like, you know, having an abortion is far worse than a child being abandoned like that. I can't wrap my mind around that personally.
I mean, how many folks are in the foster care system and we say, like, oh, there's adoption, adoption's an option. Why are you not fostering children?
Then
Why
do
are you,
it.
well, and what I tell folks and my personal belief on the matter is that if is that I would be more again I would be against abortion if I lived in a I would be perhaps more persuaded on if we had a healthcare system that supported folks throughout all stages of the pregnancy decision. If you knew that you could get access to prenatal care, if you knew that you could get access to all of these things, if you knew that you could get diapers that are usually inordinately expensive, if you knew that you could get access to all the things to sustain yourself and the child long term, like they've got in some Scandinavian countries, if you knew all of those things, if there were no kids in foster care, if we lived in some utopia, sure, then having an abortion, okay, you know, but at the end of the day, first off, I don't. Well, that goes back. Autonomy is a bigger deal than that, and we don't live in that kind of system. We live in a system in which, remember, 1 in 4 women are going to have at least one abortion in their lifetime.
Yeah.
So, and this is they found it. It is not limited by race. It is not limited by ethnicity. It is not limited by religion.
Yeah.
So if you're in church on a Sunday and you
Or
look around,
socioeconomic status.
exactly. If you, I mean, if you look around a church, there are people in there who
have
had an abortion.
Yeah.
But like you said earlier, stigma is a big issue.
Yeah.
And so what are we doing? We're shaming people for accessing healthcare that is expensive, is rarely covered by insurance. Another
That's
public policy.
misogynistic in nature.
Hyde Amendment, another terrible piece of legislation. We see things that are antithetical to or are the opposite of what folks are saying that they are. If they're claiming it's about women's health, abortion's safer than pregnancy. If it's about women's health, then sure, safer option. We should be advocating for abortion. If we're talking about, oh, well, it's too expensive to get abortion care, well, fine. Then let's look at the cost of pregnancy. What's the alternative? What's the alternative cost there?
Yeah.
What's the alternative cost of pregnancy? At every stage, we just see it's really that folks don't want to give up power.
Yeah. 100%. And I don't think that we have enough conversations about that. And I'm still just like continuously, I don't want to say shocked because I really don't think that's the right word, but just like, I don't understand how white men are still the most like powerful in our country when I just don't get it. Like that's a whole conversation I don't even know if I can have right now, but like I don't get it because really and genuinely like there are so many people in this world who contribute so many things to life and policy and understanding of just like what it is that we should be doing and how to take care of ourselves. And like historically white men are the ones that are not doing that. And
Well,
that's
they
not just,
benefit. I mean, like
yeah,
think about who benefits from the system the way it is. Who benefits from women not knowing what their own reproductive anatomy is?
yeah,
Who benefits from women thinking that a penis is the only way that you can have an orgasm? Who benefits from all of that information? If we look at it systemically, men benefit. If women do not
yeah,
know that they can achieve an orgasm on their own, if they do not think that they can raise a child on their own, if they think that they're perpetually dependent on men,
yeah,
who then kind of who then uh, reproduce this system where women are dependent on men, where they're
yeah,
not paid as much. This whole perpetual cycle. Of course, it's not in anyone's interest to tell
yeah.
women how they can live their lives.
And I want to do a little bit of like backtracking too and
Please,
say again, I don't hate white men.
I don't either. I don't.
I hate that that narrative has become just like I don't know, a cover up for people wanting to be autonomous and be feminists. It's like just because I believe that like I should have equal rights to my body as anyone else does, and I believe that like I'm perfectly intelligent and capable of being a human being, does not mean that I hate people who are not like that being white men. I'm married to a white man, love him more than anything, literally more than anybody on this planet, and like a lot of my friends are white men. I absolutely love them. But the people that I choose to bring into my life are people who understand that I am equal to them. I am equal in every single aspect of who I am as a human being. But I think that there's this narrative when people, especially women, come into the picture and they are studying public policy and they're like, now wait a minute, like you're literally reinforcing an inherently misogynistic system, misogynistic, oppressive, racist system, and I don't like that because I believe I should be able to make my own decisions. And I think that I should have known these things when I was 13 and not as I'm almost 25 and literally at Pride yesterday hearing things about my own reproductive system that I'd never heard before, right? That's embarrassing and it's sad and it's frustrating. And you're telling me you want to make policies that backtrack us again and again and again and again and again. And who are the people making those policies? It's white men. And like again, I don't hate white men, but historically they have been the ones who continue to profit off of be it emotional profit, physical profit, or monetary profit from my exact lack of knowledge. Like it's just really sad. And I think that there have been a few comments that have come through in the chat that are really good. And one of them was, I don't hate all white men. Yes, thank you, Quinny, and I appreciate that. One of them was talking about when you were talking about, you couldn't remember if it was Washington or Oregon, Quinian in the chat said, if you are making decisions about a demographic and there is no one of that demographic in the room, there is something wrong. And that was a quote that they commented in the chat for us. And I think that that's a really big part of kind of where we're going is that like we need more women. We need more people of color. That's not just black people, right? We need more Hispanic people. We need more indigenous people. We need more various groups of Asian people. Like, we need more diversity in the conversation and in the policy decision making process because right now there's just so much tokenism that it's like absolutely heartbreaking to see that there's just one or two that have worked so incredibly hard to get into a position of power and then the Senate or the House Representatives are like, all right, that's it, we've got our one, and it's just like we
Oh,
need so many more.
wait, if I may.
Please.
So in academia, the power structure itself is really interesting. Um, but quick note on tokenism. So when I had just completed a master's degree, I
Yeah.
was en route to a PhD. I was referred to by a university. I forwarded an email by a university professional. I won't name names because it's not important, and I'm not into shaming people like that.
Yeah.
And they asked me if I would be kind enough to talk to an incoming student or a prospective student. And I was like, sure. Well, I looked down at the email because I wanted to make sure that I was fully informed. Okay, they forwarded me an email,
Yeah.
told me about the student. They referred to me as the queer Jew.
Yeah.
with no mention of my first name, no mention of my last name, no mention of the
That's
fact that I just
hateful.
completed a master's degree, no mention of the fact that I was a distinguished doctoral fellow. Nothing else to my identity was mentioned except for two things that I had no control over.
Yeah.
I was born into a faith. I certainly choose to practice it. It's incredibly important to me, especially given lineage and the Holocaust and things like that. That's incredibly important to me, to build that kind of community. But I didn't have control over that, and yet those are the only two things that
Yeah.
mattered.
Yeah. That's just absolutely disgusting. But that's like
Also,
daily
look before you
life.
forward. Also, look before you forward a freaking email. For
Yeah.
goodness sake.
Well, and two, like I had an instructor um in my like undergrad that was kind enough to be like, "Hey, can I send you to this person and can you like give me a description of what to tell them?" And I think again that's placing that autonomy back to me, and saying like, I want you to be a part of this process and there are reasons,
Right.
right? And maybe that be because this student is an incoming queer Jew and it would be really great for them to know that about you, but like they should have allowed you the space to like say, yes, you can mention those things, that's fine, but also please include all of the other things that make me Toby and not.
Also, like, let me self-identify. The reality
Exactly.
is anti-Semitism has been on the rise in
Yeah.
the United States, abroad, in Arkansas. I mean, everywhere.
Yeah.
And so you're potentially putting me at risk. I can't assume that someone that's part of the queer
Yeah.
community is not anti-Semitic. The same way that I can't assume that someone part of the queer community isn't going to have homophobic views. We're not a monolith. We're groups of people, and some people have really really messy views.
Yeah.
We all have messy views. They're nuanced. They're inherently messy because we're human,
Yeah.
and we all think, for the most part, slightly differently than one another. Um, but yeah, removing that ability for me to self-identify and reducing me down to two words that was just kind of,
That's hurtful. Did
yeah.
you did you tell that person that that was not really appropriate?
No, I didn't. I mean,
It's kind of hard to do that.
it's hard to do that when there's a power structure.
Yeah.
When you're in a and it made me feel even further marginalized. Of like, well, if I speak up, then I'm gonna be just that extra queer, or I'm gonna be that loud, bossy Jewish woman. And I didn't want to live up to stereotypes. And I know so many folks who experience tokenization a variety of different ways,
Yeah.
whether it's because of their blackness, because of their other, specifically, black women are oftentimes shamed for expressing emotion because they're that angry black woman.
Yeah.
And I too am
Not here for that.
conscientious about
Yeah.
the fact that in Arkansas I'm the first Jew most people have met. So I try to make sure that I'm not perpetuating anything that could potentially be used for fodder in a hate crime.
Yeah.
And like I hate that that's how I have to think about it, but the reality is
Yeah.
we're that is the reality. It's a
Yeah.
really scary place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That hurts.
Sorry.
I hate hearing that. No.
It's pretty. Like
It's
and
just
I'm happy to say like it's
yeah.
pretty here, and it's not that I hate white men. And I think this concept itself is just the idea that it's a zero sum game, and it's not. But folks who
Yeah.
feel as if other people getting closer to a fraction of what they have is an affront to their whole being, that they have to restrict acts, like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Are they going to take anything? Are they going to take food directly off your plate? No.
Yeah.
No one's asking anyone to go into poverty to pay reparations.
Yeah.
No one is asking, but some folks are asking for that. The reality is, in most places, that's not happening.
Yeah.
No one is asking anyone to go to make their circumstances substantially worse to make someone else's better. We are asking for small incremental changes, and yet that is too much for
Yeah.
too many people.
Well, and too, like again, thinking about policy, like when I think about some of the things that are coming out right now, and people are like it's 2021, and I'm like, yeah, but you forget how long it takes for systemic change to actually happen, and that's not to be discouraging because it takes hard work, but it takes hard work for more than just a few years. Like when we think about even just like women's rights is the way they are, like it's not even been 100 years. Like we need like more time to like grow and change and strengthen who we are as individuals and as a greater population. And policy right now is taking a step backwards. But we have also a lot of people who are advocating very strongly against these changes, even with just some of the things that we talked about this morning in our group chat together about things people are saying on the internet, and people are starting to reverse shame. And I'm here for that, where people will start to shame someone for their view on abortion, or shame them on their view of religion, or lack thereof, and people are like laughing back at them, and they're like, no, this is not appropriate. And I think that even though the policy isn't changing as quickly as it should, seeing that social change and seeing historically how that tends to be the first step, does give me a little bit of hope. And I think that that's something that we kind of need to cling on to a little bit here, is that we do have a broken system, and we do have an inherently oppressive group of people that are running our country, but socially, the greater population is working towards doing better. We are not better yet. But we are working, and we're starting to see some of those changes. And I think that there's a lot of hate, as there always is with new generations, but there's a lot of hate towards Gen Z. And if there's one thing I can say that really impresses me about this generation, is that they have a no fucks given policy that is inherent among a lot of Gen Z, that I am envious of, because even as someone who is strong and independent and works very hard to be an abrasive woman, I still fucking suck at calling people out sometimes. I've got a lot of work to do in that regard. But the empowerment that I get from watching younger Gen Z coming up and doing a better job of that, I think that we have to give a shout out to them, and we have to give a shout out to middle-aged millennials who are raising their Gen Z children to be better and to do better. And as a cusper in the middle, I'm kind of like, I kind of got a little fucked over on this, but I'm learning from both sides of like the 5 years before me and the 5 years under me. And I think that we've got a lot of work to do still, but I think that we've come such a long way. And I think having people like you who can go in and really have a good grasp and understanding of like what the system looks like and what policies are really saying, and being able to formatively educate people on what those policies are, I think that's so important. And I think that there's just such a large gap, and that's not just to say in the South. Like, again, there's a lot of stigma that the South is stupid, and in a lot of ways we do fall short on benchmarks, but there are a lot of people out here who do know what the fuck we're doing, and that are perfectly intelligent human beings. um
Yeah,
and
like
we're working too.
yeah, I mean, and just I mean, so Paul, so I know that we've oftentimes heard like first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, that those are not the typical gestational markers. Like they have become gestational markers, but
Yeah.
they did not exist in science. They existed in the law realm. The
Yeah.
idea of post-abortion regret has not been named in medical journals, is not cited as such.
Yeah.
At least without lots of critique from scientists. But when we talk about like how many weeks until you can get an abortion, right? If we talk
Mhm.
about an abortion at 6 weeks,
Yeah.
6 weeks is 2 weeks after a woman's missed period, or someone who can menstruate's period. I want to also recognize that not everyone who is a woman needs to have children, wants to have children, and also folks who are not women still have children.
And also people like me who don't have periods every 4 weeks.
Yeah, so there's
Like, I may not have even missed a period at 6 weeks.
and I'm transparent about the fact I'm recovering from an eating disorder.
Yeah.
Like, my periods would not have been regular. They're regular right now
Yeah.
because of my birth control. I don't have any, thank goodness. But and I'm happy and open to talk about it, because I think it's important that we destigmatize things like reproductive health, like just
Yeah.
talking about basic things that are going on. And when we claim that it's a woman's issue, or we talk about these kind of like 6 week things, we're talking about super general things. We're talking about really abstract concepts.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the reality of it. And one other thing that I do want to say, because this is also written into policy, is that they talk about abortion, but they specify medical abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what they call a miscarriage in science?
No, I guess in a natural abortion, I don't know.
It's called a spontaneous abortion.
Mm.
So one in four pregnancies, and pregnancy being like an embryo has developed into a fetus, are going to 1 in 4 pregnancies are going to end in miscarriage, about 25%.
I knew miscarriages were way more common than people were willing to discuss.
So 1 in 4 pregnancies are going to end in a miscarriage.
Yeah.
If we call that a spontaneous abortion, at the end of the day, remove all the title, medical or spontaneous, right? It's still an abortion. It is still,
Yeah.
you are not carrying
Yeah.
a fetus to term. You are, so whether it's your body making that choice or maybe a combination of your body and your mind making that choice.
Yeah.
We have such skewed language as a result of policies that are, and they claim Protect Women's Act. Anytime I see protect anyone, I get wary, and as folks should be. If you're listening right now, take a look at anything that says protect anyone. Take a look at that policy and ask yourself, A, can I understand it? Is it written in a way that I can understand? B, is that intentional? And C, when they say protecting someone, does that really mean that they actually want to protect them or they just want to make life a lot harder for them?
Yeah. Always wants to make things harder for them.
I would venture to say, yeah, I mean, when we talk about some of the trans bills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Florida, for example, has one of the largest populations of documented sexual predators in the entire country, let alone in the United States. Okay, I'm not going to shit on Florida too much, although my personal views, fuck Florida, whatever. Florida, like statistically speaking, has one of the highest concentrations of sexual predators. You know what law Florida introduced, or Florida signed into law on the first day of Pride Month. Happy Pride. They made it legal for coaches to check children's genitals before sports matches to make sure that there's no one that's going to be playing on the wrong team.
So they basically made it legal for predatory behavior within underage populations.
So, yes, correct. But they called it protecting women in sport. USA Women's Soccer has said we support trans women.
Yeah.
Many organizations have said we support trans women. There's going to be there's going to be someone who's trans competing in the Olympics coming up.
Yeah.
For the gender that they identify with, which is the gender that they are. We've got these just skewed laws that when we talk about putting them into practice, you are allowing people, if I was 16 and I'm about to go up for like a cross country match or something, I do not want a coach of any gender inspecting my fucking genitals.
Yeah.
But they're protecting sports.
Yeah.
Because the integrity of a sport, because what they're trying to tell you is that the integrity of sports is worth more than the value of human decency.
Yeah. And of autonomy. Like, I just can't, I had not heard that. And that as like processing that, it's just absolutely horrendous. Like, I really genuinely don't understand what
well, they're not, the thing is, a lot of these laws are going to be found unconstitutional, especially abortion bans. We see that time and time again that they try to introduce, that specifically Republican legislatures try to introduce laws that are unconstitutional and have been proven as such unconstitutional in other states. The policies they tend to recycle. They're not really into like the go green recycling, like recycling ideas and policies.
Mm-hmm.
The anti-trans bills, they've introduced 20 bills in states that are nearly identical, meaning they've been written and introduced in ways that are very similar. And I'm not saying Democrats don't do this. They oftentimes do introduce similar legislation. I'm talking specifically about really shitty legislation that is directly impacting folks. When they introduce this, it ends up costing taxpayer money because legal fees are very expensive. To take a case all the way to the Supreme Court, very expensive. To even try to do that, the party of fiscal conservatism and of fiscal responsibility is costing taxpayer money because they want to score cheap political points. If you're going to pick an ideologically unsound lane, at least stick to it and just ride it all the way home.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we'll just kind of transition to the last little section here, and just tell us exactly what it is that you are working on research-wise, and then how that will translate into what it is that you're wanting to do professionally long-term. And I know that's always kind of a hard question. It's okay if that is the answer today is I want to be in the legislature. It's okay if we know that tomorrow the answer is I want to teach in higher education. Like, it's totally fine. Just kind of walk me through what it is that you study, what your dissertation currently is kind of shaping into, and what you're thinking long term with your education.
Yeah. So certainly abortion rights and reproductive justice is a passion project of mine, but it's something that I do outside of my studies right now. It's something I did in my master's. I'm no longer working on research wise, but I do study religious minorities, specifically Jews in the South, and I studied policies that claim to promote religious freedom, and in actuality, shocker, I'll spoil the ending at this point. They claim to promote religious freedom, and yet in reality, what they do is make it easier for Christians to discriminate against other people.
Yeah.
And again, am I saying that all Christians are bad? Absolutely not. Am I saying that I hate all Christians? Absolutely not. Almost everyone around me is Christian. There are very few Jews around me. There are very few Muslims. There are very few Baha'i folks. There are very few folks that have other religious identities.
Yeah.
But in our group chat, we talked about a piece of legislation that was introduced locally here. Local politics matter. Local politics matter.
Local politics tend to matter much more than
especially in
national
your
politics.
especially in your day-to-day lives. They really do. And there was a piece of legislation that said in accordance with God, and it cited, what was it, like a Bible verse or something?
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, actually.
Did you have enough?
I don't think so.
Okay, so there's a piece of legislation that was introduced in the Quorum Court on Friday afternoon that would declare the town of Fayetteville a pro-life town.
Oh, yes.
That.
Yes. Yeah. Gabby, don't come for me. I do remember now.
She remembers.
I do.
Always remember. Needed a little jogger. And this piece of legislation, when they refer to God, they are not referring to the God of my understanding.
Yeah.
Because 85% of Jews voted for Obama. Jews are one of the most overwhelming liberal organizations, religious communities.
Yeah.
And am I saying everyone? Absolutely not. We certainly have folks who are as fundamental and conservative as they come. They come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in my humble opinion, they exist in my community, but I love them anyway because that's diversity and that's important to have diversity of thought as well. But the God that they're referring to,
Genesis in the
thank you. Yeah, so it cited Genesis, which is in the Torah, the book of the first few books is we understand it the Torah, and then Jewish understanding is that was it, and then Christian understanding is that the New Testament came after that. All that piece of local legislation is citing the Bible. It's not citing the Torah, even though it's claimed to be the same. I read it in Hebrew. Most folks here read it in English.
Yeah.
It's not the same understanding. The way that a fundamentalist Christian is going to read it and a fundamentalist Jew is going to read it are pretty different. So when they say, well, it's God, it's a universal God, what about Hindus who believe in multiple gods? What about folks who don't believe in God at all?
Yeah.
Are we saying that's religious freedom?
Yeah, I think anytime that you have any kind of policy or a law or any kind of like guiding rule, legal rule, that includes God at all is inherently unconstitutional because we literally have separation of church and state, and then we don't.
So our separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. That's a separate rabbit hole. But what I want to do long term is I think it's important to act as that kind of in the interim space. I'm trying to use my fingers. I'm not trying to measure anything.
You're good.
The space between policy and what policy impacts. So specifically, I'm interested in working either at a corporation, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, focusing on how policies, a lot of which right now are being rolled out in terms of diversity, in terms of requirements for education, things like that. I want to help break down policy and help folks understand how it works for them, how it works against them. Ideally, ACLU, ADL, if you're listening, I would love a job with you after I graduate. I would love to work at an incredible nonprofit like one of those or others. But I really see myself doing a lot of the advocacy work that I want to do outside of my day-to-day job. My day-to-day job is likely going to be breaking down policy, is going to be number crunching, is going to be doing analysis and reading, and it's going to be research. And that's what I love to do, and that's what I'm passionate about. In my extra time, if I have any, I'm going to continue doing things like being co-president of Temple and leading an LGBTQ plus organization and teaching sex ed and being on half of University of Arkansas Snapchat story because who came in with an 8-inch jelly dildo and suction cupped it to the desk to do a condom demonstration? I did. And guess who was up there? A frat boy, because they think it's funny and get intimidated by it. But yeah, all that to say, I think it is important to differentiate between passion and job. And for me, it's gonna be policy. That's always been what I've been interested in. I was a debater in high school. It all kind of flows together, hopefully in some coherent fashion at the end. But yeah, I want to explain to folks who are oftentimes wanting to do the right things, but are afraid to, don't have the language, don't have someone that they feel like can explain it to them in a
Yeah.
way that isn't, fuck you, you racist piece of shit.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see that necessarily making the kind of systemic change that we're looking for, even if it is more incremental. So
Yeah.
that's what I hope to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing with us today. I think that we've got a lot of work to do, and I think that um, the big thing to take away from our conversation is just like, I mean, there's always going to be bad things. There are always going to be people who are going to want to take advantage of other people. Um, Quinian wants to punch enough Nazis, as he's letting us know, or
I
they're letting
don't
us know.
endorse violence, but punching Nazis is something that I could get behind.
um, but inherently too, we have to recognize that diversity is really important. Everyone is never going to agree. No one on this planet is ever going to fully agree with anybody else. It's just not going to happen. It's not how we function as human beings, and it's not how we're productive as a society. And even though, like, inherently we believe different things about the world around us, I think that us coming together and having those conversations makes a huge difference in how we function as a society. And so, it's okay to not like liberals. It's okay to not like conservatives. It's okay to be a moderate or not be a moderate. It's okay to not care one way or another how things go. It's not okay to be hateful or to just could be completely negligent to understanding what policies are around you, because that is how we continue to find ourselves in systems of oppression, and how we reinforce the system that we find ourselves in day to day. So, educate yourself. It's okay if you need to ask for help, but don't ask people to do all of your labor for you. And just overall, like, respect people. It's okay to have a
Don't be an
conversation.
asshole. Don't be an
Yeah,
asshole.
yeah, don't be an asshole. Vote, get involved, and learn. I like that. Yes. Toby, thank you for spending
Thanks.
time with me again today. I hope that you enjoyed being on the podcast with us. I know I enjoyed having you here. So
This is so much fun.
yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you to my husband as always for running things in the background for us, making sure things go smoothly. Thanks to our moderator Gabby for being in the chat with us today. We really appreciate you hanging out. Thanks, Quinian, for engaging with us throughout the podcast again. I've enjoyed seeing you throughout the past few episodes, and I hope you'll continue to keep coming back and listening. And anybody else who is joining us today, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. As always, this has been recorded. I will upload it to the YouTube channel that is Academic Yak on YouTube. So if you missed any portion of this, or you want to see some of the past guests that we've had, please check out the YouTube channel. Subscribe if you want to. It's totally okay if you don't. And I hope that we'll see you in the next one. Our next episode is with a peer of mine, Chris, and he is joining us from the Department of Communication as well. And he will be talking a little bit about film and the way that film impacts our daily lives. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure it's going to be a riot of a conversation. Chris is very energetic and very passionate, and we're very excited to have him join us. So I hope we see you next time, and thanks for being here. Bye.